Hey everybody, I had an idea to talk about something today, and it came from when I changed from buying hatchery stock to to ordering eggs from good breeders of, not propagators of hatchery stock, but breeders of good quality breeder stock. And that all started after my original flock, which came from Ideal Poultry in Texas, like many local feed stores used to get their chicks from Ideal Poultry. Probably some still do. There's Privet Hatchery in New Mexico, and there's Meyer Hatchery and Mount Healthy and all that. But my first original flock came from Ideal Poultry, and it consisted of 2 Silver Lace Wyandottes, 2 production type Rhode Island Reds, 2 Buff Orpingtons, and then through a series of strange things, a couple months later, I ended up with 2 Barred Plymouth Rocks. Well, they were just a couple months younger than the originals, but they were 10 hens basically, all typical hatchery birds. The next year, I got enthralled with the blue Orpingtons. They were something that was new and novel, and I ordered it from a breeder. Ordered the eggs from a breeder and hatched my first blue black splash Orpingtons, and had those for quite a few years. On some of my videos a long time ago, he wasn't on video because I wasn't doing videos then, but he was, I had mentioned him, and there's been pictures of Suede, my big blue Orpington rooster Suede. But just after my original flock turned 2 years old, I lost my first hen, a Silver Lace Wyandotte. I said, I've got to cut her open because I had no warning. The day before, she was laying out the weather was cool, and she was laying outside, and I said, don't you want to go lay in the sun? It's kind of cool today. And I picked her up and checked her over, and there seemed to be, I could see nothing visibly wrong with her. The next day she was dead. And I had to open her up, my first necropsy, my first layman's necropsy as I call it, and her entire abdomen was full of loose egg yolks. So I deduced that she's probably died of egg yolk peritonitis, and there started the cycle. One by one, they would bloat up, they quit laying, they bloat up, they go in the nest over and over. But anyway, I've got a whole video on chicken reproductive malfunctions you should look at. It's an older one from 2017, but it's very informative, and some pictures about what goes on inside a chicken, what you will find with hens who've been internally laying. But after losing, over the first few years, after losing about, I'd say around 15 hens, direct hatchery stock and daughters of hatchery stock, to reproductive malfunctions, I decided not to buy hatchery stock anymore. I did at some later date get a couple of hatchery birds that came from a Mount Healthy, and I sold them before they laid because they were such terrible examples of the breed. But my point of saying all this was, many people who were in the same boat I was and decided to start buying better stock, it's what I was told after I had consulted a PhD in poultry science and some other vets about what was going on, and the consensus in the end was, get better stock somewhere else. Just their genetics are bad. Bad genetics. So that started my love affair with breeder quality and heritage line birds. Not heritage type, but heritage line. Something that didn't come from a hatchery and wasn't bred from hatchery stock. And so I quit buying hatchery stock. But the general consensus about feeding laying birds is give them 16% layer pellets, layer feed, layer crumbles, layer feed. Back then, all the feeds weren't vegetarian. Now, most of the feeds have removed the animal protein, except for the one that I use. And there may be others, but the one that I use, which is available in the South, does still have porcine animal protein from non-ruminants, Chickens. Lesson number one, chickens are not vegetarians. Chickens are omnivores. There's a Tyson commercial that always cracks me up. They talk about our chickens are vegetarian fed, and they show Cornish cross out on the grass. I'm thinking, you're telling me that chicken ain't gonna grab a bug or a worm if it sees it? You cannot claim vegetarian fed if you let that bird out of a building. There's no way. In fact, even in the building, it probably eats mosquitoes. If it had a chance to eat a fly or mosquito, it's gonna get it because it craves animal protein. So, chickens are omnivores. But it occurred to me that a lot of people may change to heritage line birds or breeder quality birds, but they don't change their feed. Hatchery stock is generally, their frames are lighter weight. They generally are not as large of birds. For example, my production Rhode Island Reds, both died of egg yolk, peritonitis, internal laying, big mass, cheesy masses inside their abdomens. But at one point, I got some hatching eggs for some good dark Mohawk line Rhode Island Reds. I think the line was Mohawk. Those hens were twice as large as those hatchery birds, and so dark red they were almost black. They were so dark red. They were beautiful birds. They a whole different personality. It didn't look like the same breed. You look them side by side, and they were just giants compared to the hatchery Rhode Island Reds, production type Rhode Island Reds. So, the breeder quality birds, the old heritage line birds, are larger birds. Their frames are larger, their skeletons are larger. And they have different nutritional requirements. They have higher nutritional requirements than basic hatchery stock. Basic hatchery stock generally, now there are some larger birds in hatchery stock, like a hatchery Jersey Giant is still a larger bird. And I was told by breeders early on, when I started getting these hatchery birds, he said they need higher protein. Especially something like a Brahma needs higher protein. Because they put on these huge frames. A Brahma will put on, they grow in height really quickly. And they put on these big, they build frame before they build bulk, before they build the muscle. They don't fill out till later. They're just like gawky dinosaur-like things. And they put on a lot of frame. And they need higher protein levels. That's never more true than if they are penned all the time. Now mine get to free range. But, for example, a regular layer feed generally has about 16% protein. There are some that have slightly higher, like 18%. But most people try to feed the cheapest feed they can do, and the cheapest feed is usually about 16% for the layer pellets. I've seen some with 15. I would never touch that stuff. But about 16% protein. The feed I have been feeding for the last few years, for example, is 22%. It's called Super Lay 22. It's 22% protein. It also contains porcine animal protein. I have been feeding Tucker milling feeds for, well, pretty much the entire time I've had chickens. I've checked other ones like Faithway Feeds, which is out of Alabama. They're similar to Tucker Milling. They have similar products. Whatever the co-op gets from Faithway, to me, seems like it's got more dust and it's more dusty. But Tucker Milling, excellent quality feeds. So when you change from hatchery stock to breeder or heritage line stock, you're going to have larger birds. They have bigger nutritional needs. So one thing, now I know this is going to be an oversimplification, but and it's going, I don't mean it to sound insulting, okay? But basically, to summarize what I'm trying to tell you, cheap chickens, cheap feed, more reproductive issues, decreased longevity, okay? Better chickens need better feed, and you will decrease the reproductive issues almost to nothing, and you will have increased longevity. and not only increase longevity, but you'll probably also get increased laying longevity. Of course, if they live longer, they're going to probably lay longer. Although a chicken is usually hatched with every yolk she's ever going to lay already there. Boy, my Amanda, who just died recently at about 13 years old, she must have had a lot of yolks because she laid every single year until last year. Every single year. So that is an oversimplification, but it's generally true. Hatchery stock, they tend to do all right on lower protein feeds. Their frames are not as large. They don't live as long anyway, because most of the time the hens are going to, the most common hatchery breeds, especially the hybrid layers like golden comets. Now, I've never owned any of those. I've made my own with my own breeds, but they're not the same substandard hybrid built to lay like gangbusters for 2 years and then peter out really fast, and then they usually die of some kind of reproductive thing, cancer or internal laying or egg yolk peritonitis or something. Sucky genetics. But I feed the 22% super layer. On every once in a while, like right now, everything's bursting green. They're getting to free range a lot. The last feed trip, I told my husband, I said, just go ahead and get some 16% because they're getting out and they're getting a lot of greenery, and they're getting a lot of bugs and greenery and all kind of stuff. I said, you can get a couple of 16% bags, and we're going to go back to the 22 after that. But they're getting a lot of greenery. That makes a difference whether your birds get to go out in free range regularly or not. That makes a huge difference. If they don't, it's more important for their nutrition to be on point. Now, scratch mix. Most people feed a scratch mix, and some people want to feed it exclusively. That would be a mistake. Most cracked corn or 3 or 5 way scratch has about 8% protein. That's it. They need at least 16. I'm talking laying hens now. What I've used as my scratch mix, I used to use something called Knockout. It was like a 12 grain scratch mix. It doesn't, I had one rooster who was crippled, lived by himself, and that was what he ate exclusively. But I also call it chicken crack. If I don't mix it with their feed, because that lowers their protein level generally, and because they will eat that instead of layer pellets. Now my Brahmas, they'll eat anything in sight. So they actually empty their feeder quite a bit, even of the layer pellets. But over the last few years, I changed to something that Tucker Milling carries. They have 2 different feeds. One's a maintenance feed and one's a conditioner feed for game fowl. Cutting edge maintenance or cutting edge conditioner. The cutting edge maintenance is a 12 grain mix that is 12% protein. Cutting edge conditioner is a 16% protein, 13 grain mix. Both of those actually contain animal protein. They have some pellets in there that contain animal protein. But I brought a jar of the, this is what I use for my scratch. I put it in empty peanut butter jars, and I'd get out of the bag, put it in peanut butter jars, so I can grab it, I can go like that. I don't want to do that because I'll have Bash come running. He's free ranging right now. I do that, they hear that, they'll usually come running because they go like, goodies, goodies, goodies. That's the way they think of it. So I don't put it in their feeder. But this is the cutting edge conditioner that is 16% protein. And I'll show you what this consists of. It has, let me show you this mix. You see peas, corn, all kinds of grains, and you can also see the pellets. It has black oil sunflower seeds. It also has these pelleted animal protein things. But this is cutting edge conditioner right here. See what's in there? And sometimes it's hard to find an ingredient list. Tucker Milling doesn't even have an ingredient list on their site right now, because I think they try to keep it secret, but I did find a list on a feed store's site. And basically the 13 grains, and there's more than 13 items on here, but I think it's 13 grains and or varieties of grains. It contains wheat, red milo, cracked corn, whole corn, black oil sunflower seeds, soybeans, oats, field peas, winter peas, and maple peas. So it has 3 kinds of peas. White milo, canary seed, safflower seed, white millet, red millet, oyster shells, and vitamin mineral fortified pellet. So this is what I use for my scratch mix. This costs about $15 for a 50-pound bag. Now this is meant to be fed as a complete feed to game fowl. So, but this is what I use for my scratch. I think the regular what they call scratch mixes, they still cost me about $12 a bag. So for $3 more a bag, I get a complete feed, and if they actually are off their layer pellets or whatever, they're still getting a pretty good feed. So that is what I feed my birds. And they use non-ruminant meat and bone meal for the omnivorous needs of the poultry. Of course, you know, they will eat bugs and worms and all kinds of stuff. And this is meant to be fed to penned poultry to get all of their meat needs. Let's see, what else do I need to tell you? But that being said, chickens will survive on a lot of different feed mixes. A lot of people will feed grower food only because it's a little higher in protein, or does feed non-medicated chick starter plus sunflower seeds or some other kind of mix. They make up their own mix that they decide they're going to feed. A lot of people try to save money at the expense of the chickens, and also at the expense of the nutritional value of the eggs too. Now I could lower my protein levels on my feed, and I did, you know, by buying a couple of bags of the 16% instead of the 22%, because they're free ranging, they're running all over the place. But if you can't find a feed that contains animal protein, now some people say, well, they shouldn't have animal protein. What about mad cow disease? There's no such thing as mad chicken disease. Plus, mad cow disease was caused by people feeding back ground up cows to the, I mean, they were feeding things that cows shouldn't eat. It wasn't just because they were feeding meat to cows. It was because they're feeding the cows back themselves. Bad. Chickens are not going to get a problem, not have a problem for eating meat. Chickens should eat meat. If you cannot find a feed that contains animal protein, good quality feed like Tucker Milling produces with animal protein, it's not going to hurt anything to give them some mealworms from time to time. That's super high in animal protein. Or if you've got some El Cheapo ground beef or something that's freezer burned, fry it up, chop it up real good, fry it up, and feed it to your chickens. They can eat meat. They can eat fish. Now, somebody's going to ask me about non-GMO feeds. Here's a problem with non-GMO feeds. If they're affordable, they're not going to contain corn. Non-GMO corn-based feeds are extremely expensive. Tucker Milling has a non-GMO feed. It is wheat and fish meal based. It's very affordable. It's like $13 a bag. I don't feed that. I'll tell you why. Diets high in wheat and fish meal. Okay, diets high in meat and fish meal tend to contribute to necrotic enteritis, which is an infection where the intestines basically, the mucosa has severe necrosis and they actually dehydrate. There is a problem with feeding feeds only with fish meal and wheat as the protein and no corn. But of course, if you find a non-GMO feed that's about $12 a bag, you can almost be guaranteed there's no corn in it because it's affordable. If it had non-GMO corn, that would be through the roof because you know they're using non-GMO corn for other things. But I don't feed non-GMO feeds. They don't need non-GMO feeds. I mean, Yeah, it's a terrible thing that we have to feed them that, but you know, the best thing in the world for your birds is to actually be able to get out of their pens, eat things in the garden, eat things out there, eat the grass, eat the leaves off the plants, eat things outside, and get their bugs. But the whole point of this was, if you change to heritage birds or breeder quality birds, you need to up the nutrition over your hatchery stock for optimal growth and development. Yes, they can live on the other. I'm not saying they can't. They want you to get the optimal growth and development out of a great big bird like a Brahma, especially a breeder quality Brahma like I've got. These huge birds, they need higher protein levels. Don't settle for less than 18% protein, and what I feed is a 22% protein. You don't want too higher protein levels. Now, don't feed them, you know, game bird starter, which is 28% protein. Don't do that. But a decent quality protein level, anywhere from 18 to 22% is perfect for these larger birds. 16 is getting a little bit low. And the scratch mix like this is an excellent supplement. Excellent supplement. They love this stuff. I can't feed it to them all the time because that's all they would eat. It's all they would eat. And if anybody has a problem with a crop, these little grains in here tend to ferment in the crop. You don't want that. So, but they love the peas. I used to feed the grain mix that didn't have peas, and they look at it. One time they were out of this, and I got the other, and they were looking for the peas. They love those peas, those dried peas. This has 3 kinds of peas in it. So for $3 more a bag, if you don't have that many chickens, that's not going to cost you that much more money. That's not. And the 22% layer pellets only cost me, I think, $1 more for 50 pounds than the 16%. So it's really not that big a deal if you don't have that many birds. I think I've got 30 birds now. I'd have to recount. I think I got about 30, 29, 30. And it's not that big a difference. So anyway, that was what my point was for the day. And there was, years ago when I raised my heritage Delawares, I sold to a guy, a local guy, and he had a Delaware. He got one of the Delaware males from me, and I kept one at the time. And when they were about 16 weeks old, I saw a picture of his, and I've never seen a more sickly, scrawny looking bird. And mine was big, robust rooster. I mean, he was getting big and handsome and gorgeous. And I said, yeah, but what are you feeding that bird? I don't know, his name's Keith or Kevin, forget. So what are you feeding the bird? He was feeding him basically cracked corn. The bird had no nutrition. He didn't have any nutritional value in his food. And it showed. He looked sickly. He looked skinny and scrawny. His feather quality was bad. It didn't look like the same bird or the same age as mine. Mine had grown to the big, robust rooster by 16, 17 weeks old, and his looked like it was sickly and on its deathbed. So nutrition makes a huge, huge difference. Huge difference. First rooster I ever got. I got it from a Future Farmers of America kid who should have known better. It was obvious he was a barred rock. He wasn't white and black, he was black and gold. He was so gold. I looked over and it was obvious he had been feeding him only corn. I got him home. The poor bird had Favus, which is a fungal infection of the comb. It's a white film on the comb. I had to treat that with a yeast infection medication like you put on your feet or whatever. And he had lice. I treated that with DE. He was quarantined for 5 weeks. Another lesson, never throw a new bird in with your other birds. Always quarantine for over a month so you can assess the condition of your bird. He didn't have any respiratory issues, but he had a fungal infection of the comb. His breathing was odd because he was in damp, muddy water. His pen was wet and it was in the woods and it was damp and nasty. He was living with a turkey and it was just nasty. And I fixed that. I put him on good nutrition. He didn't even want to touch corn in the scratch mix. He didn't want to touch the corn. He ate everything else. The bird knew what he wanted. He knew what he needed. He ate that. Within 1 month, that bird had gained weight. His feathers, the gold was gone from his feathers. You would not believe the difference in that rooster with proper nutrition. Of course, he had no lice anymore, and he didn't have a fungal infection. But he was a really good rooster, and his nutrition made a different bird out of him. So it does make a difference, people. It does make a difference. You can't just feed your chickens cracked corn and expect that they're going to have the optimal life that they deserve to have. So, and it's not that big an expense. If you cannot spend the money on proper food for your animals, I would suggest don't get them. I'm very passionate about that. If you can't take care of them properly, don't get them. If you can't give your dog a rabies shot, don't get a dog. If you can't keep a dog in a fence, don't get a dog. Same with the chickens. If you can't try at least in a minimal way to keep them protected from things and keep their nutrition up and keep their environment dry where they live and where they roost, and feed them well, don't get them in the first place. You expect a lot of them. You expect them to give you eggs, but then you don't give them anything to build that on. So that's my lesson for the day. But if you decide to get some good heritage line birds, feed them according to their body structure, and their good genetics. Keep those good genetics going for you. Talk to y'all later. Have a great day.